for a foreigner or someone who sees the Palestinian movement from abroad, it's difficult to understand why the Palestinian left movements like the FLP and the DFLP have so much difficulties in getting a left platform of parties. A platform or a front at a moment when unity was much required.
Yes.
What can you tell about
Yes, well, actually the attempts to reach a framework of unity, especially between the two fronts, the Democratic and the Popular Front, have been going on almost continuously since, say, the 1980s, 1982 especially. 1982, when this invasion of the Israelis to Lebanon and the dispersal of the Palestinian leadership and Palestinian forces in different Arab countries, and then the split in Fatah took place, and there was also an attempt to split the PLO. So it was necessary, it seemed, that the left, and especially the two fronts, should find a way to unite in order to avert the negative effects of this internal struggle on the Palestinian movement. So there was a joint command for the two fronts in the beginning. And then there was what we call the Democratic Alliance, which included also the Palestinian Communist Party, which was at that time still beginning to, shall we say, achieve or develop its independence from the Jordanian Communist Party, and included also another group which is not exactly left. It was called the Popular
People's Party.
The Palestinian Liberation Front. It's what you may call a nationalist left group. So at that time, we started as a Democratic Alliance. We started dialogue with Fatah, and also we had dialogue with the other, shall we say, pole, the pro-Syrian, what was called at that time the Nationalist or the National Alliance, with an attempt actually to reach grounds for reuniting the PLO instead of complete schism or split. Now, of course, there were shades of differences of opinion and disagreements between the two fronts. The Popular Front was more inclined actually to be nearer the pro-Syrian alliance, and we had always been in favor of the unity of the PLO, in spite of our criticism and disagreement with Fatah. But we have always held the opinion that these disagreements should be solved within the framework of the unity of the PLO, and that what is called the Palestinian national decision should be independent. That is, to shake off, to avert, to refuse any kind of intervention by the Arab powers in the internal affairs of the Palestinian people. So we had very restless relations with Syria at that time because of their professed intervention into the schism and the split between the. And there were also always differences of opinion because of that. Now we continued the dialogue in spite of that with Fatah, and we reached what was known at that time as the Aden-Algiers Agreement, which was a very important development even in the history of the Palestinian national movement in general, because for the first time you have two blocs here, Fatah and the left wing, coming to agreement on a new basis for unity within the PLO. And that was also open to the other alliance, to the pro-Syrian alliance. We didn't have, as a group, we were ready actually to come to terms with Fatah on this basis, even if the Nationalist Alliance did not enter the unity, because we know that for the Nationalist Alliance it's not a question of platform or political inclinations or anything like that. It was a question of a struggle between the Syrian and the Egyptian-Jordanian axis. So it was it had nothing to do with the Palestinian national interest or the Palestinian national issue. The problem is that when we came to implement these agreements, I'm just giving you a specimen, shall we say, of what happens usually with these attempts to unite the left. When we came to put this agreement into implementation by convening the Palestinian National Convention or Council in order to adopt the agreement, the Aden-Algiers agreement, of course the pro-Syrian alliance refused to take part in the council, and this led actually to the Popular Front also to refuse, in spite of the fact that we have reached an agreement with Fatah. And the agreement included a provision which said that the Nationalist Alliance is welcome to join, but if they don't join, we will have the council at that specified date. So this actually broke up the relation, but we still maintained the so-called Democratic Alliance because we thought that this is a kind of protection for all the left factions, including the Communist Party at that time. Unfortunately, after that, the Popular Front chose to join the pro-Syrian, what was called the Salvation Front at that time, which was presenting itself as an alternative to the PLO. So that was a kind of breakout because we could tolerate, shall we say, disagreement as long as we were within the. We did not take part in the council, for example, in Amman, because it was held in Amman, and we knew at that time that the Jordanians were planning for an agreement with the PLO that shared Palestinian representation, which was against our platform, you see. So we didn't go to the council. We didn't, but we refused all attempts actually to discredit the legitimacy of the council because we thought that this will break down legitimate representative powers or capacity of the PLO, which means in spite of that, we tried to maintain the Democratic Alliance, but then when the Popular Front chose to join the so-called Salvation Front, which is some kind of an alternative to the PLO, we couldn't go along with them with this. So the Democratic Alliance was boiled down to Democratic Front plus the Communist parties. That was one very painful sort of attempt. Now after that, of course, there were other attempts, most of them.
Yes. That was in
that was in 1983.
1983.
1983, 1984. Another.
Yes. At the time, Syria was had a very strong.
Yes, they had very strong influence on
the Palestinian movement.
Even with us, our main headquarters were in Syria,
yes.
But we always had restless relations with the Syrians, and when this struggle was going on, we were almost persecuted in Syria. Some of the members of our political bureau were in prison.
Mm-hmm.
Others were deported from Syria, including me personally. But we still insisted that we should maintain relations with Syria, whatever. We didn't agree with Syrians. But we also were not in favor of cutting the relations with the Syrians, because this will mean to jump to the other axis, which is even more detrimental to the Palestinian cause. So,
but in this context now, in which Syria no longer is able to be present and in any kind influence the Palestinian movement, and from what we can see from abroad, there is a strong pressure and strong profit for Israel to identify the Palestinian movement with the Islamist movement.
Yes.
The situation is completely different.
Different, correct. This is what I was going to. Now we are in a different situation. Even since 1999, the second Intifada, there was a new situation in which a second Intifada erupted. There was a strong, shall we say, presentation of the Islamic movements in this Intifada, and also Fatah. And everyone realized or admitted the need actually to have another trend, another united trend within the Palestinian movement, in order to avert the negative effects of this polarization in the political Palestinian arena. So there was again talks with the Popular Front, the Democratic Front, the People's Party, which is the former Communist Party, and other smaller groups like FIDA, for example. FIDA is the Palestinian Democratic Union, which is a splinter group from the Democratic Front. There was a split. They split in 1991, on the issue of the conditions of the negotiations with the Americans and the Israelis at that time, which led to the Oslo Agreement. In any case, after the Oslo Agreement, there was another attempt actually to have a new alliance between the two fronts, but then again it failed, you see. And when the new Intifada erupted in 2000, there was this attempt actually to reach this. But we actually developed, with the participation of the new Secretary General of the Popular Front at that time, Mr. Abu Ali Mustafa, who was later assassinated by the Israelis. We worked out a sort of a platform which evaded some of the issues that were still issues of disagreement, but in the general general terms, it was, well, one way or the other, sufficient, shall we say, to find a framework for unity, which is not a merger, but it's a kind of coalition or an alliance. But in the end, the Central Committee, in spite of the fact that Mr. Abu Ali Mustafa was the main contributor to the new platform, and he was very much convinced of the necessity to have this alliance. The Central Committee of the Popular Front voted against this on the claim, or under the claim, that the platform did not have a clear position towards the Oslo agreements. At the time when the Oslo agreements actually were crumbling down, they were just, there was no other, they were no longer an issue. It was so the whole thing actually again in 2006 there was the or in 2005 there was this preparation actually for the first or the second, but the first pluralistic sort of elections for the Palestinian Legislative Council. And we all thought that it is necessary to have an agreement amongst all the left factions, which at that time were the Democratic Front, the Popular Front, the People's Party, the so-called National Initiative, which is the new group that was founded by Mr. Mustafa al-Barghouthi, Dr. Mustafa al-Barghouthi, and FIDA, of course. So that we started actually negotiations in that direction. It was easy to find a platform, an electoral platform, that all parties should agree. But we came to a point actually that, again, the Popular Front decided that they want to wage the battle with their own independently in order to prove their, or to test maybe their popularity. And with the other groups, it was impossible actually to reach an agreement on how to deal, especially with Mustafa Barghouti, because Mr. Barghouti at that time thought that he was maybe the main group because of the fact that he was the almost unanimous left candidate for the presidential elections. He was supported at that time by the Popular Front and many other left organizations. So he gained about 19% of the votes. But of course, these were not votes for the national initiative. These were votes for an alternative to Abu Mazen, to Mahmoud Abbas. Any alternative to Mahmoud Abbas. So it was impossible actually to reach terms to have a new united list. This is why we came to a coalition or to an agreement between us, the Democratic Front, and the People's Party, and FIDA. And we actually went into, but then this was a kind of coalition that could not present itself to the electorate as a, shall we say, another pole, as another alternative, shall we say, to the main parties, Fatah and Hamas. And because of the polarization of all the left parties actually had a retreat in their popularity as they expressed themselves in the ballots. So again, we tried to reach an agreement in the PLC itself, in the Legislative Council. Although we were all of us were not more than 9 representatives out of 132, but even that small number did not manage actually to. So the trouble is actually that there are, of course, political disagreements. Including, it's the same, always the same. The Popular Front are more inclined actually to be on terms with Hamas, and of course they have their own positions on questions of the armed struggle, the negotiations with Israel. And sometimes it's impossible to reach. Of course, we are ready actually to reach a general, shall we say, formula that could, but on certain issues, like for example, how to vote in the PLO on this issue or that, it was impossible sometimes to reach agreement, especially on the issue of negotiations, because the Popular Front are against all negotiations in general, in principle. And the other groups like us and the People's Party and FIDA are critical of the American-sponsored bilateral negotiations, but we are not against all kind of negotiations with the Israelis. So there was always some, shall we say, picture or image to the public that there were 2 points of view or 2 platforms for the left that sometimes seem to collide with each other. But in all cases, we all agreed for some time that there is a possibility to reach a kind of alliance which allows this kind of disagreement actually to be solved without necessarily being identical in our views, you see. But theoretically this was possible. In practice, it never worked out, unfortunately. But this is actually
no,
the story.
your explanation is quite logical and quite convincing, and in fact it goes along with the opinion I had that most of the time the PFLP was under the Syrian influence, and that many times manifested along the recent history. Anyway, if we could summarize the positions of the left, the Palestinian left, you would say that because recently there has been talking about the one-state solution once again, which for everyone who knows something about that should be the right solution, but we know that how
the problem is to get there.
But I think everyone agrees that it's inevitable that a two-state solution might be at least the first step to reach the one-state solution. So, accepting that in this first step we would have a two-state solution, what are in fact the main disagreements in this moment between FDLP,
the movements in the left?
And the left?
Let me say that. Of course, the two-state or one-state solution is not an actual disagreement, because in the final analysis, all factions of the PLO, including the PFLP, agree that the immediate goal of the Palestinian liberation movement is to have an independent state within the boundaries of the 4th of June 1967. That is the West Bank, Jerusalem and Gaza. So there's no problem about the two-state solution. Of course, some of the intellectuals of the Popular Front sometimes have
sort of delirium.
Some mental exercises with the ideas of the one-state solution and things like that. But this is not an obstacle. I mean, this is not a real disagreement. So, the main issues that we disagree on actually is, first of all, the position vis-a-vis the negotiations with the Israelis. And this is an issue that has impact actually on all the political life of the Palestinians. Even if there are no negotiations with the Israelis. And I'll just give you one example, which was only a few months ago. Of course, you know that the negotiations that went on from July 2013 until April 2014. And we were all against that, because they were based on very vague sort of terms of reference, and it was just used as a cover by the Israelis in order to continue and actually to escalate their settlement building activities. So this is why all the left were against these negotiations. But then in April, actually, it was the Netanyahu government which took a decision to walk out from the table. And so the negotiations collapsed. And there was a meeting which was due for the Palestinian Central Council, which is the mini parliament. It is a body which is intermediate between the Palestinian National Council and the Executive Council. So one of the issues that were debated in the council was of course, the estimate or evaluation of the experience of the negotiations and the new terms or conditions for any future negotiating processes. And we were almost unanimous in laying down conditions that for us actually were the main guidelines of our standpoint in the negotiations, with agreement with the People's Party, with FIDA, and finally even Fatah accepted that, because the negotiations actually were not, they were just tough. So we said that any future negotiation should include a freeze or a cessation of the settlement building activities. It should also include an Israeli recognition of the 4th of June borders as terms of reference for negotiating. And of course that the Israelis should respect their commitments vis-à-vis the prisoners, because they just refused to continue the release of the prisoners that was agreed on July 2013. And that if these three conditions were met by the Israelis, there will be no objection, shall we say, by the Palestinians to go back to the negotiating table.
Sorry, the last condition was, I do not understand,
the prisoners.
Okay.
The Israelis were in July, according to the understandings that was reached by Secretary Kerry, John Kerry, the Israelis were supposed to release all the prisoners.
Prisoners, okay, sorry, I did not understand.
The prisoners.
Oh, yes, the prisoners, yes.
Okay, so they released
yes.
about 75 of them, and there was the last installment, which was about 30 prisoners. They just refused
to let them go.
So that is why the talks broke down. And anyway, we laid down these conditions, of course, and we thought that this more or less meets the requirements of the left. In actual fact, this is what we were demanding all through. The Popular Front decided actually to walk out from the council in order to protest the idea of resuming, of the possible resuming of negotiations in the future, regardless of the conditions. Now this again posed two positions or two standpoints to the public. We just couldn't agree with such a... So this is one of the issues that we always meet, or we always, shall we say, strike our foreheads into whenever we move forward. You see. It is impossible actually to come out to the public with an agreement or an alliance which has two standpoints in practice, not only in theory, you see. on an issue like negotiations, which is the main, shall we say, arena for political action for the Palestinian liberation movement in order to reach the national goals. So that is one of the. Now the Popular Front have the platform which says that there should be no negotiations with the Israelis, that the solution for the national, of course they agree to the two-state solution, but that this should be, shall we say, forced or implemented by an action by the international community represented by the United Nations, which is okay if this is possible. We're not against it, you see, but the point is, if this is not possible, you have to have your points of view on the current movement and the negotiations. And this is one of the issues. The other issue is the line on
settlements.
No, on the armed struggle, because the Popular Front, of course, we have 3 points of view amongst the left on this issue. We have the People's Party and FIDA, who are not involved. They are not against, but they are not involved in any kind of armed resistance. And their point of view is only non-violent popular resistance. Our position is to engage or to involve ourselves in the armed resistance, but with a tactic that strictly respects international law, that is not targeting civilians, to work only in occupied territories, to target only military and strategic targets in the Israelis, and to respect international law vis-a-vis the right to resist occupation. So, this is our position, and we are strictly actually in respect, and our people in the military wing are very strict about it. And they don't go into any kind of suicide bombings or things like that. That is completely prohibited, as we are. For the Popular Front, it's an open tactic. Whatever happens, happens. Even they did have some actions that were targeting civilians in some of the settlements and also inside Israel. So in fact they are taking the same position as Hamas on this issue. They're identical completely to Hamas on this issue. These are 2 main issues that we don't have agreement on. And of course, sometimes we also have disagreement even on social and internal democratic issues. For example, on the taxation policy. We in the Democratic Front are for the principle of progressive taxation. the Popular Front are against any kind of taxation by the Palestinian Authority on the basis that the Palestinian Authority is well, based on the Oslo agreements, and therefore they do not have the legitimacy in order to tax the population. Of course, this is also not a very realistic sort of thing. Yes. But I tell you that 2 years ago, for example, there was a sharp financial crisis in the government, and we were pressing actually for an introduction of the progressive tax principle, and we managed to do that. But the opposition to that came from the capitalists, of course, from the so-called private sector, which is and from the Popular Front. So we couldn't even agree on united action on that social and economic question. But in general, we try to keep good relations amongst the main actions. Now we are also starting, after the developments in Gaza and what's going on, starting an attempt actually to try to work out some kind of a coalition or an alliance, because there were in the Palestinian United Delegation for the negotiations with the Israelis in Cairo, we did have some coordination amongst the three members that belong to the left. So, our Democratic Front, the People's Party, and the Popular Front. So that again revived the idea that maybe we could find some kind of an agreement that will not, shall we say, stop the disagreements or completely solve them, but at least to regulate how we can act together in spite of these disagreements. So this is a very difficult formula, but we are actually forced, we are called upon to try it once and once again. So.
No, it's, I have now a broader picture of the disagreements and about the issues. Do you think it's possible that there is a tactical, let's say, reapproachment between the Hamas and the PFLP as regards their need to increase popularity, because in fact there is the risk that Hamas
actually are not in the mood to be in alliance with anyone.
That's for sure.
Because they have Jihad Islami who are forced to to be allies with them. In actual fact, they control them. So, Islamic Jihad usually have more reasonable, they are more radical, but they are more pragmatic in dealing with different political issues. So they have sometimes more reasonable standpoints and ideas and points of view on different issues, but they put forward their points of view, but when it comes to taking the decision, they side with Hamas, because they don't want to be in collision with Hamas.
And here in the West Bank, Would you say that the left parties, including FDLP, managed to at least maintain their social basis of support?
Yes, maintain and gradually increase, you see. But this is a very gradual and very slow movement, because the polarization between Fatah and Hamas actually makes the left-wing alternative almost irrelevant as far as daily politics are concerned, you see. And this is because there is no left-wing
networks.
Exactly, and no social networks, no unity, and you don't have a bloc which presents itself as another alternative to the other two blocs, Fatah and Hamas.
But
you have different organizations that...
Yes, but would you agree that what seems to be lacking, once again seen from a foreign point of view, is that there's a weak connection between what might seem to be a middle class party elite and the masses, because what makes the strength of the Islamist movement is that they managed to create these social networks.
Yes, of course.
And it seems to be lacking this sort of cooperative movements, youth movements.
I agree completely.
In the left.
I agree, but this also has some relation with funding, the material basis or the material capacities that you have. And the Islamists are very wealthy as far as it's concerned.
Yes.
And of course Fatah has the control of the Palestinian Authority and the institutions of the Palestinian Authority, which makes them also capable of, shall we say,
getting their own clients.
Exactly, their own social base. But for the left, it's a very difficult situation. And especially because we are not united. Because if you are united, you face, if there's a bloc which is democratic bloc or something like that, you could face the public opinion, the electorate, with another alternative, a third alternative, which may be appealing to a lot of people, because a lot of people are completely discontent with both Fatah and Hamas.
Yes.
But when it comes to the polls, those who are against Fatah vote for Hamas, and those who are against Hamas vote for Fatah, and they don't vote for the left, you see. That's
this in a completely different framework. This happens in
even
in Europe.
In Europe, correct.
Because
even
in Europe,
yes.
There's a growing trend of
it's either the conservatives or the social democrats.
There is a bloc within the government which it doesn't matter if they are conservative or social democrats, because they have the same policy.
Exactly.
And people, when are unsatisfied with one kind of government, they vote in a pseudo opposition, which is exactly the same.
Exactly. Yes.
But in Europe now, and this is our only private opinions, but people who are not, who are completely dissatisfied and more excluded by the system, and then people who doesn't have a job, people who have a part-time job, the exclusion is growing, starts to organize in alternative ways, making cooperatives, associations. Sooner or later, I think this might be also the trend here in
the problem here is that these marginalized strata of the population are completely, or not completely, but they are mainly shall we say, absorbed by Hamas. Because Hamas has a very strong social network. They have schools, they have
youth organizations,
cooperatives, they have people who get daily rations, even from either money or food and things like that. And they have all kinds of social, and especially the schools. Their schools are all free of charge, most of them, and they are open to all students. And this makes it very appealing for for people to send there. And of course, this is a way of indoctrination which has a long-term effect on the general rising generations.
Would you say that it's, we're finalizing because not to bother you any longer, but from what you gathered, and this is something I already knew, the general framework of the Middle East is a very strong condition within the Palestinian movement, and now we are facing what was an Israeli plan of the 1960s, which was complete Balkanization of the Middle East.
Exactly, and unfortunately this is the situation.
Of the northern arch of the Middle East, because the southern arch, which is the oil arch, the Americans always kept very quiet.
There is a ceiling, shall we say,
yes,
of what could take place.
But what we might call the crescent fertile arch.
And even North Africa.
In North Africa.
And in Libya and Tunis, the situation is very, of course, in Libya it's exploding. Yes. In Tunis, it's very volatile.
In spite they have.
And even in Algeria, it's becoming more and more.
Is an American concession.
Yeah, of course, but still the social tension is mounting.
Yes, it's mounting.
And
but my question is, do you think the, let's say, some turning point might come from Egypt? What do you think about the Egyptian evolution? Do you think that a strong Egyptian government, which might have interest to resist the American hegemony, could be helpful for the left Palestinian movement?
Well, to tell you the truth, of course, we are keen on having good relations with Egypt. We think it's necessary for the Palestinians, regardless of the developments and the kind of regimes that govern Egypt. But I think that the democratic transformation in Egypt, which started in 2011, have in practice come to some kind of an arrest. And this to an arrest, a stop. And this is because of the fact that the danger of the Muslim Brothers is a real danger. And it is what you may call a real terroristic danger, because they may not have a terroristic organization, but their tactics,
their secret apparatus,
is terroristic. And this makes it, for the majority of Egyptian society, difficult actually to accept the idea of disagreement and pluralism and so on. And this is why they all voted en bloc for General Sisi. And there are indications also that this is affecting, minimizing the democratic gains of the 2011 revolutions.
Yes, yes.
But in spite of that, of course, we are in, shall we say,
Confident.
good relations with the Egyptians. We think that it's necessary, in spite of the fact that there is a turn in public opinion in Egypt which is almost anti-Palestinian because of the position that Hamas took and still is taking towards the developments in Egypt after the deposing of President Morsi. Hamas is considering itself a part of the struggle that was going on, and they are part which is allied to Morsi and the Ikhwan, which puts them on the other side of the war, shall we say, of the civil war, for the vast majority of the Egyptians, you see. And of course this reflects itself on all Palestinians, because they say Gaza, it's not Hamas in Gaza, it's Gaza. So we are witnessing some kind of an anti-Palestinian turn in public opinion in Egypt in general. And this makes it difficult actually to sort out the difficulties and the disagreements that we have with the Egyptians. Now, in spite of that, we always insist that we would like to have not only normal but good relations with Egypt, because this is our national interest.
Yes. You know, we were in 2012 in Egypt before, at the time of Morsi president, and we talked to a lot of people in the street, and in spite they were anti-Morsi, they kept their sympathy with the Palestinian movement.
Yes.
Almost everyone we spoke to in the streets. But we felt at the time that if the Ikhwan were left to be, I don't know, 1 year more, it would be enough for them to lose most of their popular support, because...
but on the other hand, they could strengthen their grip
on the Ikhwanization of the state.
On the state.
Yes.
And that was a danger. That was a danger. It was the kind of thing that could have happened, which is similar with Germany in 1933.
Yes,
the Nazi party came by an overwhelming majority of the vote, and then they completely had their grip on the state, and afterwards there were not even other elections. That was the thing that many Egyptians, including the left wing, and mainly the left wing actually, the left wing and all the other liberal tendencies, were afraid of, that the Muslim Brothers will have a grip on the army, on the judiciary, on the other, and of course there was a constitution which was...
Yes, they tried to move the power of the judges, and you know, I talked with Dia Kashwan, it was at the time and he was convinced that the Americans would use the Ikhwan government to make them accept a peace agreement with Hamas.
They still are, yes. They still are.
Do you think now, in this context, in which there is a possibility of a stronger Egyptian government, this pro-Western hegemony, which seems to be happening during the Hamas time, during the Morsi time, because Morsi in foreign policy was following the American policy. It's now more possible. I mean, not to go back to Nasser time, but that a stronger Egyptian government might encourage or at least be a positive factor for the Palestinian standing point in negotiations?
Yes, of course. We are interested actually. We have an interest in stability and strong government in Egypt because if there is a situation in Egypt which is similar to Libya or even to Yemen, for example,
Yes.
this is completely detrimental to our national interest. So we have strong interest in stability and in a government that could achieve stability. And of course, there are disagreements between the Egyptians and the Americans. The Americans insist, for one reason or the other, that the Ikhwan should have some share of the government in Egypt. I don't know why, but this is the case. And of course, the Americans have very good relations with the Qatar, Turkey, Ikhwan axis. And Qatar and Turkey are completely involved in meddling with the internal situation in Egypt and mobilizing all their capacities, Al Jazeera and the money and everything.
As they do in the Syrian war.
As they are doing in Syria, they are doing the same thing in Egypt, or trying to do the same thing in Egypt. So it is a civil war which is not as professed as it is in Libya or in Iraq, for example, or in Syria. But it is still a civil war, you see, that's going on. And the Americans are encouraging this. They are, shall we say, encouraging the Muslim brothers to go on with their defiance of the present regime. And this is why the government, the Egyptian government, are adamant, shall we say, on
putting them.
Okay, we're not against you, but please do not meddle with our affairs, you see. And they are trying to have a policy which keeps them, shall we say, on an equivalent level with the Americans. They are not subordinate to the Americans as the other previous regimes are. This is for why, for example, when there was an Egyptian delegation to Washington. I don't know, I think it was the foreign minister or something. And the Americans insisted that he should go through a search, a body search, in order to enter the White House, you see. Okay, he had to do it. But then when Kerry came to visit Cairo, they insisted that he should go also through the same body search in order to enter into the presidential palace. It was a one for one, you see.
Yes.
So this is an indication, and of course they're trying to improve their relations with the Russians.
Yes.
They have very strong support from Saudi Arabia.
Russians are selling guns now.
They have financial support from the Saudi Arabians, and they are buying grains from Russia with Saudi money. They are even buying weapons from Russia with Saudi money. So they are in a better position now, and they don't urgently need the American assistance. But of course they do not want to break with the Americans completely.